Okay, now on to episode 3. So in here we go over the frame selection, hints and tips, and the summary. So this is a little bit of a longer episode because when we dive straight into this, your frame selection. Now this is, I would argue, in terms of all of these 3 episodes, this section here is possibly the most important. You could have a patient that has money no object and they're willing to pay anything for their glasses. If you don't select the right frame and you've got the right index, it's going to be game over. It's a bit of a balancing act between choosing the right index and the frame selection. So going back to what I said, remember, if someone is unable to spend any money on any high index lenses, etc., we've got some very good £19 frames if they're on a very strict budget that do work with this in mind. So our head office have worked quite hard to ensure those patients are still looked after. Obviously, try and upgrade them from a £69 frame and above, but that isn't always an option. Just because they're looking at £19 frames, I've said it once, I'll say it again, doesn't mean to say that they don't deserve a pair of glasses that look nice. I say, it's my honest opinion. It's a bit of a cop-out we just put on the special instructions. Have a vice thickness, declined thin and light lenses. Because they're not going to be happy, not going to come back, then you get the bad word of mouth, and it doesn't make us look very good. Don't be frightened with these patients if they're unable or unwilling to spend money on thinning treatments. If you know it's going to look like a dog's dinner because of the lens form, etc., of what you've just learned, tell them. You've got to remember, you're they put their trust into you. You're the one that needs to tell them if these lenses are going to look thick, because they might say, well, if I'd have known it's thick, I'd have picked something else, or I maybe would have gone for the high index lenses. They're relying on you telling them. Say if you upgrade into a £69 frame, that gives you that sort of excuse to go into that launch pad to do it. If they're not willing, so in short, if they're not willing to spend on the any high index lenses, be fussy with them. Avoid the supras, avoid the rimless, as we'll come to in a second. So these are your 4 options. So you have full rim plastic, so FRP as I call it. And go over, so I don't know why I've put it in this order. You then got full rim metal. And then you've got Supra, or Supra as I call it, and then you've got rimless. I'll just put on the rimless. So those are your 4 main types. Now, in terms of when it comes to talking about indices, your order of preference should be thus. Always plastic first, then full rim metal. And then should the prescription be okay with it and they're okay to spend a bit of money, preferably on thinning treatments, then you go into your Supras as number 3. And depending on the prescription, I always put rimless down number 4. So if someone has thick lenses, if they haven't had rimless before, try and steer them into 1 through to including 3. If they want a minimalist looking frame, a Supra is always going to be a better option to go. If they don't want, if they don't like the idea of like the hard rim frame, then if you go for a metal frame, you might be able to find a more neutral complementary colour if they want that minimalist type of look. But rimless glasses, you do need to be fussy with. Yes, they come with high index lenses automatically, for reasons I'll come to shortly. But but if you sell a rimless to someone with a too high prescription, they're going to be forever coming in to have them adjusted for reasons I'll come to in a bit. So going on here for there. So in terms of Supra frames, these ones here, the way that these are made is you cut the lens flat and you cut a groove in it. Now, the reason why this is number 3 down the chain is because if you think, a minus lens doesn't make too much of a difference. You can get quite comfortably with one of these. You can get up to and include a -4, maybe 5, as providing the frame isn't too big. You can normally get away with a minus up to that prescription without too much trouble, without them looking horrendous. 1.6 is always the better option because a 1.6 lens, the reason why it's using a rimless frame is because they're more durable. Your standard index lens tends to be a bit more brittle. It's more susceptible to chip. Not to say it will chip, but especially if they're having these reading glasses, it's not the best of ideas, because if you can imagine on a plus lens, you've got your thin edge here. If this is quite thin, especially reading pair of glasses go for a bit more punishment, they tend to chip a little bit easier. So I would, try and push them into the 1.6 lens if you can, even if they're only about plus or minus 1, doesn't matter. But anyway, back to this. So that's how it goes there. So if you can imagine your thin edge here, like I say, needs to be, I think British standards is is 3 millimeters, I think. So therefore, if you can imagine that's a minimum of 3 millimeters opposed to the knife edge thickness we've been talking about there, then by the time you get up to the thick edge, it's going to be even thicker. It's going to be 3 mils thicker in the middle. With a super frame, do not ask for low base knife edge, especially not knife edge, because you can't have a knife edge super frame because of this reason. So that's that there. So if you can, as a side here, even if they're thick, their prescription doesn't necessarily warrant needing high index lenses, try and steer them into them, or try and at least mention them. Just say the lenses are more durable. Say it's not going to make a great. So say you have someone that comes in that's about -150 and they want a super frame. Just say to them, your prescription doesn't need it. It's not going to have any effect in terms of lightness or aesthetics over the thinness. But thin and light lens material comes with the anti-glare coating. Is a little bit more durable. They are less likely to chip. Don't say they will chip if you don't have it. Just say they are less likely to chip, and especially if they are near vision glasses. Okay, so that's that. Now, in terms of rimless, the way these are made, as you know, we drill them. Drill 2 little holes which are 4 mils apart. Or was it 3? One or two. I know the holes are 1.2. So you've got the 2 little holes that come in there, and going into them. Now this is where my artwork gets very bad. You've probably seen them before. You have the little lugs. I think that's sort of how you kind of go. But the idea being is these need to be nice and flush to go in there. So, and that's where the idea of them being is they used to make rimless glasses before with a nut and a bolt. So you literally bolted together. The problem there is if you have a bit of a prank with them, unlike 1 through to 3, which where the lenses just pop out, or you've got the sprung adhesive, etc. These aren't very forgiving, and they just break, and you break the lens. And you can imagine you've got a nice 167 tailor-made varifocal. This reactions, they've got to then replace both lenses, and it become very expensive, and you're not going to have a very happy customer. The idea of these is, if they have the same prank with them, the whole thing just falls apart, and we can just put it all back together again. Downsides there is obviously they do tend to get there. So when you're dispensing one of these, if they are a plus lens, even if they're only about a plus, 1 or 2, try if you can to put them in a 1.67, because it's a spheric. And what that does, if you imagine you've got a plus, say, 2 lens that's fairly curved, imagine you've got your holes that go through, they always go through a sort of, there. You can imagine it just doesn't, it's fairly thin, it just doesn't go in quite right. So if you have a nice flat lens, you've got the plugs going in, it just makes it more flush. They just last better, they're easier to adjust. Basically, they just look better. So if you can, especially if you get to the +3 sort of scenario, always try and give them a 167. And again, obviously, because of the lens form with a minus, it doesn't make any difference. So they can have whatever index they like, as long as it's a minimum of a 1.6. So the key part with these, though, is, I wish I could rub this out now because I've just drawn loads of stuff over. So the key part here is your size. So with a plastic frame, with a minus prescription, obviously the larger you go with any of these options, the thicker your lens is going to be. With a plus lens, try to afford your 1, 2, 3, 4. And be very fussy with these two. Don't be frightened if someone comes in with a nice large plus rimless frame and says, I want my reading glasses in here. You look at the prescription, going back to our early example, it comes to a +5. Don't be frightened to say no. If they want rimless, try and get them to pick a smaller rimless frame and insist upon a 167. They upgrade the £20. Or if they like that minimalist look, like I say, drag them into a Supra. it's going to be better. But try, if you can, to try poo-poo the idea a little bit, and just say, because of this lug sort of system, I've said it on numerous occasions, so just be aware you become in store a lot more, because reading glasses go for a bit more punishment, and you tend to have a bit more maintenance. I would suggest maybe a plastic or a metal frame would be better. If they're having one of each, so one distance, one reading, then maybe suggest a rimless for their regular everyday pair, if they've got their heart sound rimless. So again, you're not saying no to someone. So I hope that sort of makes a bit of sense. Being sure, if you're not sure whether someone, you think the thickness may have an impact, ask someone's advice. As in, ask us, what do you think? Do you think that, I'm not sure whether this frame's too big. Just get someone's opinion. Even I've done it. I've actually asked, I've asked Tracy before. I've asked, who else? Tom was about once, and asked him with something. Like I say, just like, if you're not 100% sure, like I say, just ask. There was something else I was going to say, wasn't I? That's right. So going back to, remember the blank size part, that is quite useful. So the eye size, this is going to be a very bad diagram because mine never was very good at art school. So that's your bridge, that's your arm. So what you're aiming for a well-fitting frame, as you know, is the eye to be in the centre. If it's not, as in so it's quite a large frame, then obviously the gap between, remember the FPD and the PD, that number is going to be bigger, as in quite a bit bigger. Therefore, what that's going to mean is your blank size is going to be bigger, and that's going to equate into your lenses being thicker. Now, it's especially a case of obviously a plus. So you always go as small as you can get away with. All right. So that's that. So we now come into your hints and tips. So the first tip is what we've literally just gone over. So your frame tip is key. Consider the lens form, forerim versus supra. Like I say, so with all those little lessons we've gone over before in the previous little bit, all right? So if the patient is having two pairs, single vision distance and one reading, encourage the patients to have their readers much smaller than the distance, especially if it's a plus prescription. Remember the +2 with the +2 ad, or +3 with the +3 ad? That equates to 5. That's the very reason why. And the sort of justification, you should know what impact that's going to make now on the thickness. But the way that I sort of sell it to the patient to make it a little bit easier for them is, just say, your prescription is much stronger, therefore it'll be much thicker. The smaller you go, the smaller the thickness is going to be. And I tend to sell it in the sense that if they're reading, they tend to only have a bit of a smaller area of focus, and they tend to notice the frame quite as much and steer them to the plastic one. And it's also easier for them to look over the top. So if they're reading something in front of the telly, it's easier for them to do so. If they've got a driving pair of glasses, it's the flip of that. If they've got something too small when they're driving, especially looking at wing mirrors and their rear view mirror, they may be more conscious of the frame. So if they've got a larger frame, they're not going to notice it quite as much, where the prescription isn't quite as thick. Therefore, it's normally okay. So that's that one there. Okay. So the high plus prescription, I've purposely left this one from the previous one. So I remember this, I think it was a Specsavers training session I did actually. They gave me the saying, small round plastic is fantastic. So try and go into that sort of, try and tick as many of those 3 boxes as you can to get the best option. So obviously small and round plastic. So if they don't like plastic frame, try small and round. If they don't like the round, go small, or small and plastic if they like the little square one. The reason why round is quite good is because if you can imagine, this will be, let's do it this way up actually. So I will draw a straight line one day. So ignore that. So you've got your the straight line there. So you've got the plus lens here. If you can imagine your cross section of the frame here. So you imagine that being a cross section, you'd have this as a little lip that comes in the top. So if you've got it round, then as it comes in, it tends to, you don't have as much because it tapers up. The shape just basically suits it a bit better. I know I'm trying to say, I can't quite describe it, but just trust me when I say it just moulds into the frame that's that little bit better. But it doesn't have to be round, because everyone wants to look like Harry Potter or Captain Mainwaring if someone's of that generation. So, but small is the key part. Go as small as you can get away with. So in your order, if you will, 1, 2, 3. The round is a bit of a third one. It just makes it, so icing on the cake, so to speak. Small is your number one priority. Small as you can get away with, I always say. Plastic just it's obvious why the plastic works better. The round, just one of those little things. Okay, let's do this. Here we go. Okay, so in terms of NHS vouchers, and this is where you can get a B voucher to work to the max. So using a £69 frame as an example, you can offer the free 1.6 lens, and if they have a £69 frame, the 1.6 equals £9.70, and the 1.67 lens equals £29.70. Now, the reason how we get there is obviously you have your £69 frame, you offer them the free 1.6, the free thin and light promotion that we do, which means the frame's still coming at £69, and the your B voucher is worth 59. I want to say 30. I think it is. Yeah, I think pretty sure it is 59.30, especially with that maths there. So I could be wrong on that one. But anyway, so what that does is therefore you take that as the face value off of the £69, equates you to £9.70. Obviously, a 167 lens is £20 more, hence it's £20 more. So if you've got someone, particularly if you've got like a 15-year-old who's now on a 1 year, maybe sometimes 2 year recall, they've got a slightly larger frame, so they need something a little bit bigger. They're a bit more conscious of what the frames look like, but they've been given your B voucher. They're more than likely going to be looking at £69 or £89 frame anyway. Use this as a tool, okay? They're entitled to it. It works. And if you say, okay, with the lens thinning, just say to them, especially with this one here, especially if they're like your +5, say, this lens is normally £75, but with the NHS voucher, with this frame here, I can make it £29.70. 30 quid slide down from 75 is quite palatable. A lot of parents should, even if they can't sort of justify it or are able to pay it, at least give them that option. People will surprise you on who's willing to pay for what. Honestly, they really will. At least give it to them as an option so they know it's available to them. But that's how you can get the voucher to work as high, because we can only claim that £459.30 if we charge for a product that's the same price or more. Don't forget you've got the aspheric option in with that, with a plus lens, which is £25. So that does go a little bit way to getting more towards your £59.30 there. So that's that one. Okay, so moving on to the next one. Sunglasses. So this is another little tip that I do. This is only a personal thing, so you don't feel, if you don't feel comfortable with this, then don't. But I intend to say it's consider a lesser index and maybe polarised instead. Try and steer into a plastic frame. I'll come to a little option we've got with that in a minute. Now, the reason why with this is obviously your thin light lenses are £55, and your polarised lens is £59. Okay, polar. So obviously it works better with your plus lenses. Okay, so I tend to go from this because if you steer towards the plastic frame, for obvious reasons, that's going to hide the thickness a bit better. They tend to lend themselves better to sunglasses anyway. And also, the tint hides a lot of the thickness. And thirdly, they don't tend to wear their sunglasses quite as often, so it may well come into that. So if you sort of set it that kind of way, and then put in the polarisation and do this little price scenario here, it's only £4 extra, I'll go for it, especially if you sell the polarised lenses as good as they are. But be careful, because it could backfire. If you've said to them you might not necessarily need them thinned, etc., 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 and they've picked a lovely sunglass frame, they might say, oh, you're right, I don't need them thinned, I'll just have the plain tint, thank you. Doesn't always work, okay? So just be careful. It can backfire, but I would say, in my personal experience, I would say 70% of people go for it. And I play those odds. Hasn't got me into any trouble yet, but that's a little selling tip that I've discovered myself that I find works. Feel free to try it. Because what you're doing is you're giving the patient the right option. So even if they do elect to if it does backfire in the sense that you haven't got any upgrades, you just got the basic tint, in a way, you've done the best service for the patient, because they've then got the best thing for it there. And, they say, I saved some money here because, they recommended this, and that positive word of mouth gets around. So, yes, it's backfired you in one way in terms of a short-term sale, but you've won loyalty of a customer, which I would argue, well, I think any director would probably agree with me, is much, much more valuable for you. Okay, so on that sort of reference, you may hear me say, pick a pair. Sorry, I would often say to gents of a certain generation, if you pop a, when I say certain generation, I normally mean sort of 40 plus, I tend to say, if you put a pair on and you feel a bit like Ronnie Corbett wearing them, then you get the right idea, because you always want to go for something a little bit larger, a little bit more plastic. So who is Ronnie Corbett, I hear you cry? This is Ronnie Corbett. Now, his glasses are very iconic. He was part of a comedy act in the 70s and some of the 80s. They were two big comedians of their day. They did like lots of variety shows, etc. They were like the Antideck of their day. They were massive. But the point is, their glasses were extremely iconic. And here they are. As you can see, this frame here is a lovely, well-fitting plastic frame, and it's quite dark. And I've always thought that these glasses would make very good sunglasses, and here they are coloured in. Okay, I'm sort of shifting the image up, but as you can see, they look pretty good. So you can just imagine, actually. So you've got your Ray-Ban up there. So they look a bit like, they do look pretty good. So, but that kind of gives you the idea. So you're going from one to the other. You see, it does work. So it gives you the sort of, I would argue in regular, most people, they're not going to like that sort of style, but sunglasses, it really does lend it to it. What I tend to find, if they're really struggling with this, obviously you can't show them this sort of scenario, I've done it for you for this training. I tend to take them over to the sunglasses, find a pair that I know is going to fit them, regardless of style. And put them on, they can see how good they look as sunglasses or the style. Then I just pop the lenses out there in front of them, they put them back on, they go, oh yeah, I see what you mean, it's massive. Then when you're looking at the clear frames, it's a lot easier, for that. That works particularly well for smaller customers. So if you've got petite ladies, it's a really good trick that works really well. Okay, so back to that. This is a really handy tip. I actually had this scenario with this would help today, actually. Look at your previous pair to meet expectations. So if you've got someone with a +4 prescription, +4 readers, and they've picked a fairly large frame, I always say, have you got your previous reading glasses with you? More often than not, they have got them with them, because we actually ask them, obviously, don't we, to bring their old glasses with them. So 9 times out of 10, they should have them there. If they haven't, you've got to go on a bit of trust here. Say, were they the same size as these? If the answer is yes, you've got that on there, and you can put in your special instructions, especially if they've declined the thinning. You put in there thinning declined. Same size as previous. Aware thickness. So you've covered your base there 3 times. You would have obviously offered the thin and light lens. They've declined it. That's fair enough. But this is the important part of why this works and why it's quite important. You've checked the previous pair. You've met the expectations. They already know how thick they are. Just because we feel they might be too thick, they might be happy with it. Well, they're only for reading. I don't care. You get that with a few people. But the point is, it's the same size as previous. That's what they're used to. And they are aware of the thickness. Now, if it comes to the old frame is much smaller, go back to my sizes. Tell them now with this knowledge that you've got that the reason why, I recommend picking something maybe a little bit smaller, because basically you've got two. I would actually word it a bit better. I say you've got 2 options here. That frame's fine; it will work for your prescription, but they are going to come out thicker. The way around it to get this to work, to come out as good as that, is to have them thinned. If I appreciate you didn't spend the thing last time. To get them as good as this, though, you would need to pick something small. They might say, "I'm fine. It's just for reading." Cover your note. Obviously, you've missed the middle one, but notes. Cover yourself. Okay. That's exactly the same. There we go. Consider prism. That is something that does sometimes get a little bit overlooked. So if you've got prism in there, so if you've got, say for example, a +4 -2, just to make some off the top of my head now, with a 1 prism base in, you've got that, whatever the prism is, in terms of, we're saying find the highest meridian. I should have put it in that part actually. Whenever you've got prism in there, you add that prism to your highest meridian, regardless of what the direction is. Just keep it simple for yourself. It's a little bit more complicated than that. But in terms of recommending the right product for the customer, if you add that prism to what your highest meridian is, you can't go too far wrong. Okay. If you've got like 2 in one, just whatever the highest amount of the prism is, just add that one to it. Again, it's a bit more complicated. It's quite crude, but it just helps you make the right recommendation very quickly. Okay. Okay, lowest index possible. It sounds like a strange thing to say, because you could argue, why don't you stick everyone in a 174? Go back to the diagram from episode 1, the Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon thing. The higher index you go, the more it refracts the light and actually narrows your view down. So you get what we call chromatic aberrations on the very edges of lenses and sort of images and things. So optically, it's not as good. So the more you go up that scale, the more it splits the light, and you get those colour fringes, the less good optically it is. It may be good for in terms of appearances, etc. But it's a little bit of a balancing act. No, you don't want everything into a bottle top. But obviously, the more you bend the light, the less clarity you get of the image. So if you've got an option between a 167 and a 174, and the difference is about like 0.7 of a millimeter, go for the 167. If it's like a 20% swing, then obviously go for the 174. It's making a difference, or at least throw it out there as an option. Okay, so it's only a very small, more minor thing, which is something to consider. Okay. Split indices. Now, what I mean by this is sometimes you'll get someone with a plus 050 in their right eye, and in their left eye they're like plus 350. Isometropic, I think is what it's called. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, the point is, you do sometimes see prescriptions that are quite high like that, and what some people do to save the patient money is they'll give this one a 1.5 with AR, and they will give this one a 1.67 with MAR. If they've had it before and they've had no trouble with it, then do it. If an optometrist has recommended it, do it. Don't do this off of your own back without getting it checked by an optom. If you had a DO, I'd say check with the DO, but because obviously the difference between these, unless obviously you pick this one as a spheric, is it does the light, bends the light in a different way. You've got the different, remember this one where I said the lowest index possible, you've got the different V values. Just optically, you've got two lenses that are working slightly different. The powers are going to be right, of course, but for some people it can throw some problems. So do those split indices with an air of caution. Seek guidance before you do it, is all I'll say, because if you're not careful, they'll come back in for a concern handling. Okay, try if you can. I just try and avoid them altogether. In fact, I can't remember the last time I did one. I just put them in the same thing, because it doesn't matter. The reference is plus 050 there. If you put them in a 167, it's not going to make a massive amount. It can't go any thinner. It will only get so thin before it doesn't meet British standards. So what you're doing is you're evening them up. So it just makes it better. And it also gets complicated. If this patient, 15167, had reaction lenses, you run the risk of them, because they might be coming from different places. You have the option of one changing a different speed, or even a different shade of brown or grey. It can happen. Trust me, I've seen it. So I'll say just be careful. So here we are in summary. So these are the steps to do. So transpose your RX to find your highest meridian. So highest meridian. Should have written that in there, shouldn't I? So you want to see what power you're working with to make your recommendation, is what I'm saying. Your frame selection. Again, I can't emphasise enough how important that bit is. That's the most crucial part of everything. You've got to make sure that frame's right. In fact, when I asked Luckman, I said, I'm doing this training session, I said to him, is there anything you want me to go over? And one of the key things that he said was frame selection. And I agree with him wholeheartedly. Index. So then you consider the index. Which index is the best? Is the 1.5 with a better lens design, i.e. than the spheric, the best thing? Or do we need to consider 1.6, 1.67, or some of the other ones, more specialist ones we discussed earlier? Give clear notes to the lab. Often a very underlooked one. The lab can't read your minds, okay? If you want, they don't know necessarily you want that knife edge, especially if they come into it. Yes, sometimes it is surface and it does it automatically, but they're not going to know. If you want a specific blank size, ask the lab for the blank size, etc. So, but this note here should go to any job you do, regardless of the index, etc. But give clear notes to the lab. In fact, I have actually worked in a lab where if an optical assistant didn't put any notes in, it was given back to the optical assistant in case they'd missed anything. Okay, those are a bit of anal things too, but the point is, cover yourself. It makes you look better, makes you feel more thorough. And if someone says, you know exactly what's going on, even if it's just promotion you put through, it doesn't matter. But anyway, in terms of thickness, essentially, give clear notes to the lab. I don't know. I think I missed one here. Yeah, here we go. So, ensure the patient has the best deal, or be mindful of the patient's expectation of budget. One and the same thing. So I've skipped something somewhere. I don't know how that's happened. Never mind. Where are we? So that is literally just, like I say, in a perfect world, I'd put everyone in a 167, but you've got to be wary that not everyone necessarily needs that. So a really handy tip here on what I tend to do, is I should put them in tips actually, is when I dispense, I tend to tell them show them the menu as I call it. So I'll say, frames here start from £19, all the offers and promotions start from 69, etc. You might have heard me do it. And then I walk away. I give them 2 minutes. I give them the space, because most people are happy with that. Some people want the help there and then because they've got a clear idea what to do. Especially if someone's never had glasses before, you've let them know you've kind of given them the assurance, try this, try that, and the other. One of two things will happen, I've noticed, and this happens to everybody. Those that are conscious of a budget, they'll tend to hover around the sort of 69 budget end mark. They're quite conscious of cost, and it also helps you when you're dispensing some of the necessary thinner options that may be necessary. It keeps you mindful of that, okay? If money's a sort of no object and they're the mind that, well, if I justify it, I'll get it, they'll look everywhere. And it's just one of those little things on how it helps you help the patient with the budget very subtly without asking them, what's your budget? I've asked that to a few patients, but that's after building up a rapport, and I think the language is appropriate. And that is pretty much it. So I hope I've covered everything. I might well have missed something. So if you're a member of the top team and you think I've missed something, please let me know. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask me. But it doesn't have to be me. Ask Tom, Tracy, Nabil, Shahid, even the lab. Luckman up there, bless him, he's extremely busy. So try not to bother him if you can. But any of us will be happy to help you. We're all a good team here, and I hope it will. We'll find the right solution. Double check something. If you're not sure, check it. It's not as if you're getting in any trouble or anything, is it? So, because we want the right thing for the patient at the end of the day. So, I am working on a couple of other training sessions if you like this sort of format, but I would appreciate some feedback. Let me know. Anyway, I've waffled enough. I'll see you guys later. Bye now.